So starting, I'd like to just take a moment to reflect that we are on others' lands that we get to live on, and the indigenous peoples who have stewarded these lands for the last thousands of years here on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people. And specifically, it's the Hokuminum and the Sokotan people whose land we on Salt Spring enjoy today. And as we go forward to talk more about our climate and the crisis that's facing our climate and what we're doing about it, I just thought a little reflection about the indigenous perspective on how they think about nature would be useful as a way to start the conversation. This has been very impactful to me, and it really talks about the importance of language and how it sets our minds, influences our mindset as a people. And specifically, with many of indigenous people's languages, it influences how they think about their relationship with nature. Because in many indigenous languages, nouns and verbs are categorized as either animate, meaning living, or inanimate, not living. And so in these languages, nature is made up of living beings, not just people, not just animals, but also trees are living, and flowers and plants and lakes and creeks. And that's very different, as you know, from our English language and from Western languages, where we have fairly minimal living beings in our language. We talk about humans being living and animals to a certain extent, but not much beyond that. And so in indigenous language, a tree that is growing out of the ground is animate, living, but a tree that has been cut down for a canoe or a table is no longer living, it's inanimate. And why this can be important is, I think, if you speak and feel the nature around you as being alive, I think it gives you a certain mindset about how you feel if you're damaging it or taking from it. So how do you feel about cutting down a tree that's living, or plants, or pulling fish out of the sea if you're speaking them as animate objects every time you mention the word? And so it makes me wonder, does our English language, which doesn't recognize nature as living so much, it helps me, and when I think of it, the way the indigenous language thinks of it, it helps me feel that symbiotic relationship with the earth, and maybe minimizes or makes me think less about the extraction mindset that we settlers have brought to the earth as we try to maximize the economic return that we get from nature and from the earth. So I'll just leave that with you as just a thought as we go into this in terms of how the indigenous way of thinking and knowing can impact the way we think about our planet and what we need to do to protect it. So before we get started, it's always great to know who we're talking to. So we're going to ask you to share with us, if you would, in a poll, a little bit more about you and what your mindset currently is about the climate challenges and the ecological crisis in front of us. So I think, Erin, you're going to put up a poll, which each of you can participate in. Okay, you should be able to see it on your screen right now. If you don't, since you're muted, I can't tell you to scream. I'm going to assume that the technology is working. And so the question that I have for you is, where do you currently stand actively addressing ecological sustainability and the prevention of a crisis on our planet? And you can see the choices and just go ahead and click the one that's the most close to how you feel. So you're dormant, not active at all, except in your mind, dipping your toe in, have made personal changes in your life. You're gearing up, ready to take action in small ways when asked. There's actually 5 of these. You may have to scroll them on your screen. Number 4 is I'm in, actively dedicating time and effort to address climate change. And then 5, you're an eco-warrior. And so this commitment deeply influences your daily outlook and how you think, talk, and breathe climate action. So this is great. I don't know if you can see the results. Erin, do we show these now, or do we go on to the second question?
We'll wait until the second question.
Okay. So continuing on getting to know you, this question is, when you think about climate change concerns, do you think more about reducing the impact of humans on Earth, climate mitigation, or do you think more about adapting to the impact of the climate to keep our lives and our economies safe? Adaptation. Great. So mitigation, adaptation, both equally. That seems to be a favorite, or you're not sure.
What's
Okay.
great, Mary, is that no one said don't know, which is that's a change over a few years ago.
Yeah, we are very smart climate people here, which is fantastic that all of you have your heads in this space already.
Do you want to go over or maybe show the results on the first poll, Erin Ann?
Yeah, there's just 52% people have answered the second question, but maybe we'll go ahead and share it now.
Yeah, and Emiko and Tracy, feel free to pop in with your video at this point if you want. They're co-hosts, wonderful co-host for tonight's event.
We're going to introduce you guys in a minute.
Mary, can you see the results there?
Yes, I can. Okay, I didn't know if it was coming up as a graph. Great, perfect. So in terms of how you currently stand in actively addressing the ecological sustainability, 56% of you are I'm in, you actively dedicate time and effort to address climate change regularly. And very few of you, none of you are dormant, only in your mind. And a few of you are dipping your toe in and gearing up, which I love. That's fantastic because, as you can imagine, we also often are preaching to the choir. We preach to ourselves, and we're always trying to influence people to think more about what does climate change, what does sustainability mean to you and your life. So it's really exciting to see that. And then I'm scrolling up, and I see 36% are eco warriors. So that's fantastic. So a huge majority are actively working on climate change every day, and we have some people gearing up, which is that's really exciting. So thank you for that. And then if we go to the next question, you can see, as Brian pointed out, that most people are thinking equally about adaptation and mitigation, knowing that you need to do both, to be honest, and the same action will help in both areas. And Brian, I know you think a lot about this. I don't know if you have any comments for the group in terms of how you interpret the results and what it means to us here on Salt Spring.
Well, I think there's been a big evolution, Mary. It's I'm not sure how Emiko and Tracy feel, but even when we were doing the climate action plan a few years ago, a few of us had to fight to get adaptation on the menu. When we did that, everyone was on board fully once we got there. But I think when we wrote the climate action plan, we were on a fulcrum point between those two. And today's a very different world. What do you folks think?
What would you expect, Tracy and Emiko, in terms of what you would see?
I'm actually really impressed that everybody knows what adaptation versus mitigation is. I think we've got a very high level audience here tonight. I think that a lot of people don't understand the difference between those two things. And it's really exciting to see that with a lot of work and effort of the community groups and the education and outreach that you've clearly been doing, that it is possible to get to that level of understanding, because I think it is a really important piece of what we're doing. We need to immediately reduce emissions, but we've made a mess, so we also need to adapt to it. And what politicians tend to focus on is the adaptation piece rather than like, let's not make it any worse. So yeah, so I'm really excited to talk about mitigation and adaptation.
And I know you're going to have a lot to say about that in your report card. And so maybe I will go ahead and introduce the two, our partners here from the BC Climate Emergency Campaign. Really happy to have Emiko Newman, who works directly as a coordinator for the BC Climate Emergency Campaign and will be one of our presenters of the report card, as well as Tracy Saxby, who her home organization is actually as executive director of My Sea to Sky in the Squamish Sea to Sky area. And she's a marine scientist and the lead author on the BC Climate Emergency Campaign in the 2023 progress report. So we are so happy to have both of you here. It was just by chance, it turned out that we came out with our report cards at the same time. And while we here on Salt Spring, you may realize this, but you may not know it's totally by design. We are extremely local in the work that we do under Transition Salt Spring. And we always remind ourselves, while we need to understand the big picture, we want our actions and our advocacy for the very, very most part, 90% will be local to Salt Spring, because there are many other organizations that are doing fantastic work, such as the one that we brought to you today, that are working at a provincial level or a federal or a global level. And so that gives us the luxury, so to speak, to work just on issues that are local to Transition Salt Spring. But we need to be a part of the bigger picture. And so the fact that the BC Climate Emergency Campaign report card came out pretty much the same time as we did and had some really impactful outcomes that are worth discussing. It was a great opportunity to have this partnership. And as you'll hear about the coalition that's behind all of that, Transition Salt Spring was one of the early organizations to support the work. So again, we've been partners for a while together on this. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Emiko and Tracy. I believe Emiko is going to start the presentation, and then Tracy will follow. And over to you two ladies.
Thank you so much, Mary. Hi, everybody. So nice to see you all here. My name is Emiko Newman. I'm the coordinator of the BC Climate Emergency Campaign. And of course, I'm joined by my colleague Tracy tonight. And I just want to begin by saying a huge thank you to the Transition Salt Spring folks for bringing us on and allowing us to join this webinar. And we are both really excited to be here and to be in conversation with you tonight. I'm going to start us off by giving a brief background of what the BC Climate Emergency Campaign is for folks who don't know. And then after that, I'll be passing it over to Tracy to talk a little bit more about the details of our Climate Action Progress Report. So what is the BC Climate Emergency Campaign? We are a group of civil society organizations, all of whom feel anxious about the climate emergency and who are coming together to collaborate to increase the ambition of climate policy and action in BC. All of the groups who are a part of the campaign feel very strongly. We all agree that the greenhouse gas emissions in our province are not going down at the speed that the crisis requires. And we share this belief that BC's climate plan, called Clean BC, needs a profound jolt, one that would transform Clean BC into a genuine emergency plan and force the provincial government to take real action on climate change. So that is what our group is all about. That is why we were formed. And that is what we have been pushing for the past 2 years. So just to give you a little bit more detail, as I just mentioned, we've been running for 2 years. We came together in 2021, and those founding groups essentially came up with this list of 10 urgent actions. I'm not going to get into that because Tracy is going to be running us through those actions very shortly. We put those actions together into an open letter, sent that letter to the BC government, and at that time, the letter was supported by 200 organizational signatories. 2 years later, we are very excited to have over 550 organizations that have signed on to show their support for these 10 urgent demands. Now, of course, the BC Climate Emergency Campaign launched our Climate Action Progress Report very recently. This is a photo from our launch. We were so excited to do an in-person launch. This was just 2 or 3 weeks ago, so quite recent. And as I finish up here in my section, I just want to emphasize to everyone that this is what makes our campaign so strong, is that we convene diverse sectors of society. So in this photo alone, our speakers, we have a doctor, the president of Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. We have Indigenous leaders, including Grand Chief Stuart Phillip. We have, of course, environment folks. We have a professor who works in an agriculture department at a university. We have a bishop of the Anglican diocese. So that is really where we get our strength, is in showing the public and showing the government that it is not only climate activists who are fighting for a better future, it is everybody. we all have a stake in this crisis. We all have specific ways that we are doing our part, and we are all in this together to try to push for a more ambitious and truly emergency level provincial climate plan. So here is our climate action progress report, and I'm very happy now to pass it over to Tracy Saxby, who's going to be walking us through the report.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today. One of the first things that I'm going to talk about is why did we decide to do a report card in the first place? And the idea for this happened in 2021. And the impetus for it was because we kept on hearing from MLAs that nobody cared about the climate. Despite the 2019 having one of the largest climate strikes globally around the world and having nearly like hundreds of thousands of people in Vancouver, according to the MLAs we were speaking to, nobody cared about the climate. And often what we were hearing is that anybody that did care about the climate was getting dismissed as an activist, rather than a recognition that regular people are stepping up and taking action out of desperation because they don't know what else to do. So when I proposed the original open letter, I have worked as a marine scientist for nearly 20 years. I'm an expert in visual science communication, working with universities and government and agencies all around the world. And I've done a number of report cards in the past. And there's a funny thing about report cards, because when a politician gets a report card and they get a bad grade, they don't like it. And they want to do something about it. They want to start taking action. And so when I proposed this open letter, which we could then turn into a report card every year, that was kind of the idea and the thinking behind that, was to demonstrate that it's not just climate activists that care about the climate. It's not just a few people. People everywhere really care about this issue. And I think that the climate emergency that we've been experiencing here in BC is really driving that change home. So in 2021, we wrote the open letter and we had 200 organizational signatories, as Amiko said. And then last year in 2022, we released our first progress report. And at that time, BC wasn't doing a really great job. They failed on 6 out of the 10 climate actions, and I'll go through each of these one by one. We initially set up like 3 grades: to fail, progress, and then complete, and then unknown. In 2023, we're starting to see progress, and that's exciting. It's small steps at the moment, but it is exciting to see the BC government adopting the language that we're using, responding to us, and starting to take the action that is needed. So in 2023, we are seeing more minor progress. So the BC government failed only on 3 of the urgent climate actions that we were calling for in our open letter, and they've made minor progress on the other 7. And I'm going to break this down for you one by one now. So the first climate action is to set, sorry, and I'm just going to move this a little bit. Things on my screen, is to set binding climate targets based on science and justice. And this is one of the areas where BC is failing right now. BC has failed to meet its emission targets for over a decade. And every year that the BC government delays urgent climate action means that we must cut emissions even more rapidly and over shorter timeframes. So we're making it much more difficult to take action by failing to take climate action now. And this is really clear when you start looking at the data. So if you look at the emissions in greenhouse gas emissions, the trends over time for BC from 1990 through to 2001, you can see that emissions have gone up. And while there was a slight dip in 2020 due to the pandemic, we saw an increase again in 2021, and we are fully expecting that once we see the data for 2022 and 2023, emissions are going to keep on going up. And as soon as LNG export facilities come online, the emissions are going to go even further up. So we are moving very clearly in the wrong direction, where what we need to be doing, which is on the right-hand side of this chart, we need to be reducing emissions down to 60% by 2030. And if we had started action last year, we only would have had to cut emissions by 7.5%. Because we failed to take action for a year, we now need to cut emissions 8.6% every year. And if we fail to take action this year, then next year we have to cut emissions by 10% per year. So we're making it that much more difficult for us to stick to our climate reduction goals, to keep the planet livable to 1.5 degrees. So action number 2 is to invest in a thriving, regenerative, zero emissions economy. And we've seen some minor progress on this. Governments need to spend 2% of GDP on climate mitigation efforts every year, according to a world-renowned economist. For BC, that equals about $8 billion every year that we should be spending on climate mitigation and climate adaptation. And in budget 2023, only $1.6 billion was dedicated to climate action. So that's about 1/5 of what we need to see. Action number 3 is to rapidly wind down all fossil fuel production and use. And this is the biggest fail for the BC government. Essentially, because the BC government is failing on this action, it is undermining all the other amazing work that is happening. So the reason that BC government failed is that they approved new fossil fuel infrastructure. They approved Cedar LNG, which is a liquefied natural gas export facility in northern BC. Once that project becomes operational, it will emit 8 megatons of greenhouse gas emissions every year. That's more than the entire city of Vancouver. And that was improved in 2023, when the science is clearly telling us that we need to do everything we can to stop new fossil fuel infrastructure and rapidly decrease fossil fuel extraction. We don't see any policies to stop new fossil fuel infrastructure or phase out existing fossil fuel production. And BC's plan to electrify the oil and gas sector, what they're proposing to do is to essentially greenwash oil and gas extraction by saying, well, if we electrify everything, we're going to reduce some of the emissions. But the reality check is that we're still extracting fossil fuels and exporting them. And it's essentially comes down to greenwashing. And if we use our limited electricity, then that means that we can't use that electricity elsewhere to reduce emissions from our buildings or to reduce emissions from transportation or other sectors. Action number 4 is to end fossil fuel subsidies and make polluters pay. And we're seeing minor progress on this as BC has committed to review and phase out fossil fuel subsidies. They've committed to put a price on pollution, which is one of the most effective ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But BC is still the second largest provider of fossil fuel subsidies in Canada, second only to Alberta. Action number 5 is to leave no one behind. And this is where BC is focusing a lot of their efforts, which is good, but this is where we're talking about reaction rather than being proactive, and focusing on mitigation. So instead of adaptation, they're focusing on instead of focusing on mitigation, they're focusing on adaptation. Like, how do we adapt to this mess that we find ourselves in? So the climate crisis is deepening existing inequalities for the most vulnerable, and the BC government has established a new Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, and they're updating BC's emergency management procedures and support programs. Who knew that was a tongue twister? And they're giving First Nations self-governing authority over disaster response and prevention. So there's some really excellent steps that are happening here, and it's really important. We do need to adapt to climate change as well, but this is where the government is currently focusing most of their efforts, and we need much, much more. Action number 6 is to protect and restore nature, and this also gets minor progress. There was a really big announcement just before we released our report card. It's called the Tripartite Framework Agreement on Nature Conservation, which has dedicated $1 billion to protect and conserve biodiversity, habitats, and species, and recognizes First Nations leadership in ecosystem stewardship. BC has also taken big steps towards meeting marine conservation targets, but the reality check is that old growth logging is continuing, and more than half of the most at-risk forests remain open to logging. The reason that this grade gets a minor progress is because right now these are only words. We want to see these promises turn into action. We want to see the commitment on the ground, and that will result in a much better grade for this. Action number 7 is to invest in local, organic, regenerative agriculture and food systems. Climate change, as you know, on Salt Spring Island, is a major threat to food security. So BC has been making new investments in food security, Indigenous food systems and salmon restoration, but there are a number of very big challenges that need to be overcome, including water restrictions that unfairly targeted small farmers this year. And there's the least affordable housing and farmland contributes to growing food insecurity across BC. Action number 7 is to accelerate the transition to zero emission transportation. This is another one of the actions where we've seen a significant amount of effort made by the government, which is great. So there's progress that's been made on electric vehicles, charging stations and transit, but highway expansion continues to induce increased traffic. So if you build it, they will come is real. If you build more highways, then people are going to use their cars to get places. Whereas if you reallocated funding to public transit and active transportation, then people are going to use public transit more, or they're going to ride their bike more, or walk or ride or roll in other places. So we really need to focus on the behaviors that we want to see if we want to see those behavior changes. Action number 9 is to accelerate the transition to zero emission buildings, and this also gets some minor progress. But the big gap is that there's no plan to phase out fossil fuel heating in buildings, and there is no plan to phase out fossil fuel utilities. BC has installed about heat pumps in about 10% of homes. Most of those are in new homes. So it's great to see that heat pumps are starting to be installed. But if we look at what's happening, last year, only 5,000 households installed heat pumps in 2022. So using electric heat, which is really great, compared to 10,000 new FortisBC customers that signed up for frac gas. So again, things are moving in the wrong direction. And heat pumps, little shout out to heat pumps. I installed a heat pump a couple of years ago, and it is amazing because not only does it heat my home, but when we get those heat wave events, it also can cool people's homes to keep people safe. So I turned on my heat pump in the heat dome in 2021 for the first time. I felt very fortunate to have it. The other thing that my heat pump does, I have a HRV system installed in it. So when we experience wildfire smoke, which we do often, it also means that the air that I'm breathing inside my house is clean. So I don't have the same exposure to pollution and the health impacts that come from that when we experience wildfire smoke, which is getting worse with climate change. So lots of benefits to heat pumps. Action number 10 is to track and report progress on these actions every year, and this also gets a fail. Right now, BC's climate accountability legislation doesn't allow the public to hold government accountable and track progress. Like, how are they doing? We don't know because they're not reporting it, and their own legislation doesn't let us do that. While some plans and policies are underway, the plans lack ambition and they're not embedded in legislation yet. And you can see that in this whole report. They're getting minor progress because they're not responding to the climate emergency with urgency. They're not doing what we need to do to take action so that we minimize harm for people and the planet. BC is also ignoring the major risks. We face a number of challenges to reduce our emissions, and the biggest risk is that BC is continuing to expand fracking and liquefied natural gas exports, and that is undermining everything else that you and me and the government and local governments are doing to reduce emissions. It's completely wiped out because these great big dirty fossil fuel infrastructure projects are being built today and being approved this year when we shouldn't be doing that anymore. So our overall assessment of BC's climate emergency response, the climate crisis is worsening. It is destructive, it is disruptive, and it is deadly. We are experiencing on the ground the very real impacts of climate change right now. I've personally experienced so many different impacts of climate change, and it's costing people a lot of money. Climate change is expensive. BC on the whole, has been reactive instead of proactive. So they are focusing on adapting to climate change instead of focusing on reducing emissions, which is what we urgently need to do. And the incremental change that is being implemented lacks the urgency that's required to really address the climate emergency. We're calling on them to confront the climate emergency, and they're not doing that. LNG is a carbon bomb. Because of the focus or the continuing support on fracking and LNG exports, it's undermining everything else that we're doing. And we also wanted to highlight that citizens across BC are mobilizing for climate action. It's not just climate activists. It's your average grandma. It's the kid in school. It's regular people like me who decide that we have to turn from our careers to become activists because no one is listening. And that's my personal story of how I went from being a scientist to being an activist. I felt I had a moral obligation to speak up, and I needed to start taking action on this and trying to make climate action a real issue. So the amazing thing about this campaign that is so inspiring and humbling to me is that 550 organizations from agriculture, arts groups, businesses, community groups, faith groups, Indigenous groups, labor unions, youth groups, seniors groups. Like, it's a very diverse movement that has come together to support this campaign and to support the original open letter. And we now represent 2.2 million British Columbians, which is about 40% of the population. So we've built so much power around this campaign, and I am humbled and awed to be part of it. It's really inspiring to me. It's really inspiring to feel this momentum and to be part of that momentum. It gives me a lot of hope. And the good news is that what we are doing is working. So we timed the release of our progress report just before the BC NDP convention. And the response at that convention is that the Premier told the BC NDP convention that he's nowhere near satisfied, and housing and climate action were his top two priorities. So we're hoping that that is going to translate into government. We need to see a non-partisan approach to climate action by the BC government, by all of the parties, and that is what we are working towards. That is what we are calling for. We are facing an incredible challenge, and we need an urgent and non-partisan response where we all come together to take action, to take the action that's required. And so this is where you can help too. We are still recruiting signatories to the open letter. So if you know a farmer, if you know, or if you're part of a community group or a faith group, or if you own a business, you can sign up as a signatory to the open letter, where we're asking for organizations and businesses, faith groups, labor unions to sign on. So please help us recruit signatories. We want to show that this movement is building momentum. The other thing that you can do is to email or phone your MLA and MP and ask them to prioritize climate action. We need them to hear from you. They need to hear from regular people. It doesn't matter how informed you are or not. They just need to know that this is an issue that you care about and that you want them to take action. You can meet your MLA and bring the progress report if anybody's interested in doing that. I'll hold it here so it shows up. If anybody's interested in doing that, we have physical copies that we can give you, and we can support you with training so that you're comfortable meeting with your MLA. We want to make the 2024 provincial election a climate election. It needs to be with all of the different parties. So all of the candidates that come forward, you need to ask them, what are they going to do for climate action? What do they have planned? And I know there's one more thing in here which I can't see. Oh, finally, we need you to vote next year. So that's it from me, and I'm going to hand it back to Mary.
Thank you, Tracy. That was just amazing. And Emiko, wow. It's so good to see all the work that laid out. When I'd read your report, I was really, really impressed and amazed. And to hear you present it and the passion in your voice and how far you've come from it, I don't know. We're just really proud to be partners with you on this. So thank you. And I've heard this a couple times, and I keep coming up with questions and things I'd love to chat about, and I know you guys probably are too. I should have mentioned earlier, if you have questions during the presentations, just put them in the chat, and we will get to them at the end of the two presentations, and have a bit of a give and take there, so we can understand some of the points that you'd like to hear a little bit more about. And but now we're going to go on to our Transition Salt Spring report card, and I'd like to introduce to you Brian Young. We all love Brian, who's our new, relatively new, couple years old board chair for Transition Salt Spring. More than that? Okay. I don't have it in my notes, but Brian has come to us from out east. He came to Salt Spring 5 years ago, has an amazing background, 2 decades of work in energy efficiency and renewable energy. But of course, if you've looked at the report card, what Transition Salt Spring has done in the climate action plan, which he was a big part of, it's much broader than just energy efficiency. And he's very well versed in all things related to saving our planet and adaptation and mitigation here on Salt Spring. And he has an incredible challenge to present a very comprehensive report card, which covers all the bases for here on our little island. So over to you, Brian.
Yes, good evening and really welcome to everybody. I'm really pleased to be with you here tonight. This was long in making. I'm just going to get the presentation up on my screen here. And I'm excited to tell you about this is our climate action plan, and we're having basically a mutual admiration society here between the BC Climate Emergency Campaign. They're really excited about our report card, and we're really excited about theirs. So we look forward to the discussion. So in 2021, TSS released the Climate Action Plan 2.0, known as CAP, with 250 actions in it over 6 key areas. So its goals were to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, by 2030, which was echoed a lot of international targets. And secondly, to get Salt Spring ready for the impacts of climate change. The new report card, which you can download, shows us how we're doing against the Climate Action Plan. So like with the previous presentation, we won't be able to go into a lot of detail. You can download that. But instead, we want to talk about some of the highlights from it and how we intend to respond to what we learned out of the report card exercise. We're also going to include all of you in a conversation, as Mary said, with Tracy and Emiko from the BC Climate Emergency Campaign. So please do use that chat window so that we can have lots of questions during the Q&A. So we had 2 key goals for the report card. One was to develop and apply indicators and metrics which can serve as a baseline for tracking climate action progress every 2 years. That sounds really geeky and mathy, and it is, and really hard because the data is not there. It is there in patches, but we had to do a lot of work to get enough pools of data to be able to make the kinds of observations we made in the report card. Secondly, the second goal is to publicly communicate successes, challenges, and vulnerabilities, while, of course, mobilizing political and public support for bold climate action. This is a big deal report card for us because it marks a pivot for Transition Salt Spring 2024 in terms of the kinds of activities we're going to be doing, political action being a big one. So the big revelation tonight, probably not a surprise to our eco-warrior folks in the audience, we're not on track to meet the Climate Action Plan 2.0 goals. Our lack of progress, though, is paralleled all around the world, with Canada and BC lagging significantly in a number of really important areas. We're not ready for the multiplying climate change threats posed by wildfires, droughts, and heat-related emergencies. And as you heard from Emiko and Tracy, we are simply not undertaking the planning needed to protect our communities and our ecosystems that we depend on, nor are we reducing emissions quickly enough. And we can already see these changes washing up on our shores. Just take a look at the local climate impact slide on the screen. Let's look at some of the data, though, behind these expected impacts. The numbers that are behind the maps I'm going to show you are from the most recent package of IPCC data used by countries all around the world. IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and it's the UN body that works with member states all over the world to come up with a consensus position on climate change. It is a conservative one, I have to say, but thankfully is getting more realistic. So over to the next slide. This map of BC and Vancouver Island, well, mainland BC and Vancouver Island, has a little call out right where Salt Spring is. And this map shows us that we can expect up to 112 days with temperatures over 25 degrees centigrade, starting in around 2071, when my son's going to be 54 years old. But when many of us here tonight were kids, say between 61 and 90, Salt Spring Island saw approximately 15 days over 25 degrees. And on the next slide, this shows us average temperature for an average day in January, starting in about 2071. So recalling back to when I was a kid, Salt Spring would have been seeing average January daily temperatures of 1.5 degrees centigrade. 2071, we'll start seeing averages of 6.2 degrees centigrade. These kinds of changes will have massive impacts on the number of pests we have, for example, and the list goes on. So that's just a bit of context. Here, this is a picture I took during our king tides in November last year, because Environment Canada said it was going to be a whopper. But the bad news is that sea level rise is accelerating much more quickly than forecast due to the conservative nature of the models agreed to by IPCC member states. And we can now, though, even according to those forecasts, expect almost 2 feet of sea level rise by 2100. It's starting to hockey stick. We urgently need to plan for a retreat from some of our coastal areas now. And yes, that means Fulford, and it does mean Ganges. This has big implications for infrastructure like roads, ferries, water treatment, and existing buildings. Oops, back one. So we need to act unanimously now to reduce emissions and get ready for the changes that we actually have already, unfortunately, committed ourselves to. That CO2 is already out there, and there's a time lag between when we emit it and the impacts that it has on climate. We also need to build resilience while reducing risks. That's the climate change adaptation that Mary talked about earlier in our poll. The good news is that adaptation often aligns with emissions reductions, resulting in multiple community benefits. So the report card focused on 5 key areas. And believe me, there are many ways in which you can do a report like this. And in fact, the headings you have here don't line up precisely with the Climate Action Plan. But this is the way we decided to frame the report card this time around. And we chose those 5 areas because of, 1, their high emissions profiles, 2, their climate change adaptation potential, and 3, the relative climate risks they pose. And there are, I'm happy to say, some areas where we've made some progress, and we really need to celebrate the progress that's being made, particularly in a small community like ours, where we know our public officials, where we know the folks who are actually involved in a lot of these initiatives. So the first one I want to start with is forest protection. We have significantly enhanced forest conservation on Salt Spring with 555 acres in recent acquisitions, most recently on Reginald Hill on the south side of Salt Spring, with Humetitsum, the Hokominam name for Mount Maxwell, which is now actually a park that's managed by CRD, Creekside, the Creekside lands, and also the Bettis Road Larmore lands that kicked it off a couple of years ago. And also our fire risk reduction project with North Salt Spring Waterworks in the Maxwell Creek watershed is attracting attention from all over Canada. In fact, there'll be a link in the chat to a talk that our very own Ruth Waldeck will be delivering very shortly. It's a webinar that you can participate into to learn more about the great work that she and her large team are doing up on the mountain. Farmland Trust Initiatives. My God, I was just at a awesome, and John Cooksey and Pam Tarr, who participated in the awesome food summit on the weekend, are actually in our audience tonight. And hats off to you folks. You must be tired today, but lots of great stuff coming from that mighty organization, including finally the opening of the Root Food Hub, and it's going gangbusters, going very strong. Under new leadership, and of course the Salt Spring Abattoir, which has struggled for years but is on a much better footing now. This is strengthening local food systems, promoting sustainability, and of course self-sufficiency on our island. Also, our markets are going strong with the potential for a year-round market in the old, soon-to-be old, fire hall. We have some areas too where there are some developments, but these are areas where we felt it was important to signify some concern, where there's action that's stalled or much more work needs to be done. And here are a couple of examples on that score. One is Island Pathways. Great news. They secured federal and provincial grants to do some preliminary planning to close what is essentially a 22-kilometer gap in what's known as a Salish Sea Trail network. It's a continuous loop, 170 kilometers long, that goes from Crofton all the way down, I guess looking from your direction, down to Swartz Bay, with this massive gap after you get off the ferry when you get to Salt Spring. And what's missing, of course, is safe cycling on our island from Fulford to Vesuvius. And for that, we need widened shoulders to complete this cycling amenity of regional significance. TSS is working with Island Pathways and our local elected leaders. Hats off to Adam Olson and Gail Baker and Gary Holman, and to help close that gap. But progress, I have to say, and it says so in the report, has been slow, with limited action from CRD and the province. This needs to change, but I know that with perseverance that we will get there, and hopefully we'll have some good news to announce on that front soon. The development of the Island Trust Salt Spring Island Watershed Protection Plan, that's a mouthful, demonstrates a very proactive approach to safeguarding our island's vital natural resources. It's an achievement that we have to celebrate. But the Islands Trust, due to pressure from some trustees, has voted to ask the CRD to take over the role that they've been playing, the modest role they've been playing in watershed protection through an entity called SWIPA. But there is no institution, CRD hasn't yet agreed to implement a watershed protection plan. The Islands Trust is a planning authority. Only the CRD or an empowered CRD local community commission can bring watershed level planning and action to our island. This is of critical importance as forests get drier over hotter summers and drinking water becomes more scarce in the years to come. So there are a number of areas where we are nowhere near where we need to be in terms of addressing the scope and gravity of the issues I'll highlight next. Here are a couple examples. One of the biggest risks we probably can all agree on and fear on this island is from forest fires. And yet we've seen limited progress in wildfire resilience planning and forest management. The CRD, however, did this year issue a wildfire hazards report. And the actions outlined in the report, however, really need to be robustly supported with coordinated action within and between local and provincial levels of government. Great report, but we really need, like this report card, we need to see action coming out of it. So TSS is working to prototype the kinds of techniques and strategies that we need to face climate change with the North Salt Spring Waterworks, with now a 5-year contract we have with that organization to help them out. But work like this in this small area needs to be done on an island-wide scale. You'll see a link again to that chat that Dr. Ruth Waldick will be doing, sponsored by the Strathcona Wilderness Institute. And you can find lots of resources on our website to explain what we're doing up on the mountain. So we need comprehensive strategies, not only up on North Salt Spring land, but all across the island, and regulatory measures, including carrots and sticks, to address this key climate risk. So hint, the key thing will be the upcoming official community plan and land use bylaw process is going to give us the best chance we'll have in years to influence policy in this area. And we are going to need your support to make this happen and to make sure that the message gets through that we need better forest risk management policy in our official community plan. 4%, a mere 4% of our food comes from our very own island. With our island dependent on, we know, fragile supply chain connections like our ferries and the waning ability of the Western US states to keep us in produce, we really need to up our game for the challenges ahead. We'll be pushing for coordinated political, financial, and community support for island grower and food processor supports. Like, we can get library books out at basically taxpayer support. Why can't we be supporting our island growers and food processors in an area as vital as food? That makes climate sense and fiscal sense, because more of that money stays in our community while making us more resilient to future supply shocks as crop failures increase. So we've completed a first round of meetings this fall with the CRD, the CRD's LCC as well, and with Island Trust officials as part of the introduction of the report card to our community. We also in October held a supper at the library, which was wonderful, with a range of island nonprofits and agencies, including community services and the Salt Spring Foundation. And that evening, if you're going to beget more suppers, you can count on it, because it was very productive. Out of all those fruitful discussions we had this fall, key priorities have emerged, which I'd like to share with you this evening. So Transition Salt Spring is now finalizing our 2024 strategy, and we will be fundraising for a policy researcher / advocacy campaigner to help with our advocacy goals. Your donations are going to make a big difference to our ability to get concrete action happening on this island in these areas. And the first one is climate smart land use and planning and permitting. We have an old patched up land use bylaw and official community plan that does not adequately reflect climate risks like sea level rise and forest fires. As I said earlier, the Islands Trust is preparing to review the land use bylaw, or certain sections of it at least. Island groups need to get ready, like TSS and our allies, to speak loudly in the face of calls by some for unlimited development and no climate change adaptation. With your support, we will be at the table. Number two, we need a comprehensive strategy that includes new planning regulations, forest stewardship programs, incentives, and resident education to manage our forest on this island, the vast majority of which is in private hands. This work provides jobs for young people while making our community much safer. With your help and collaboration with local government and our fire district, I know we can get there. Three, on a similar vein, water and forest are part of the same, basically two sides of the same coin. Our watersheds are in trouble. Deer, drought, ditching, and climate change. You get all that together, and these issues and threats are mighty, but they can be addressed through land use policy and, again, programs, incentives, and education. We need watershed protection services funded by the CRD, like most districts on Vancouver Island have, including Nanaimo. They already have these functions. We need them here too. With your help, we're going to work with water districts and our local government to design and deliver these policies and programs to build climate resilient watersheds. Number four, integrated waste management. Love this topic. We have so many great local volunteer-run waste management initiatives, including the Agricultural Alliance's drum in Burgoyne Bay that digests a waste from the abattoir, and the wonderful pickups of invasive species that happen every year as a result of the hard volunteer effort of our TSS's own Native Plant Stewardship Group in partnership with Salt Spring Fire Rescue. But there's no overall system that's publicly funded to reduce our waste and our burning and our export of things like septage, food waste, and plant waste. All these materials, if properly processed, can improve our forest and agricultural soils, helping increase their fertility and their water retention. These are going to be really important things in the years ahead. On the good news side, the CRD is championed by Gary Holman, is looking to buy dewatering equipment for our septage. Imagine all those trucks, those GFL trucks that go over to transport our poop off the island every single day. It's mostly water, people, and that has a huge carbon load. So, but that, however, the dewatering equipment is really just the first step. We need to do way more than that. Let's work together to develop a made on Salt Spring Island integrated waste management strategy. Number 5, almost done. One of TSS's key policy advocacy goals for the next 2 years is to get that 22 kilometers of safe cycling infrastructure built from Fulford to Vesuvius. With your help and the coordinated work with our wonderful partners, Island Pathways, and our wonderful local elected officials who are working with us, we will get there. Help us make cycling safe for visitors and residents alike. Lastly, really, a lot of us at Transition are really excited about our pod program and our emergency program. It's amazing because it's unique and it really reflects a lot of neighborhood involvement. The CRD emergency program supports that pod program, and it's seen a big increase in funding and communications in the past year, I have to say. That is welcome good news. But to address the big threats ahead, we need to go way beyond grab-and-go bags and support neighborhoods to be more self-reliant and interconnected when emergencies and tough times hit, and they are going to come. TSS is in discussions with the emergency program, and I know John Wakefield's here, so thank you for being here tonight, John, to develop a role for TSS and other community nonprofits in building neighborhood capacity and community resiliency. We are willing partners. We will need your help out there to accomplish that, be it by encouraging our local leaders to support our requests to the CRD or by directly participating in strengthening your own pod. So think of the Climate Action Report Card as a wake-up call for our elected leaders, businesses, and our residents to get serious about preparing for the changes ahead. We are not well prepared for the climate extremes that we're already beginning to experience and that the science tells us will worsen. TSS is the lead organization on Salt Spring, pushing government to take bold action on climate change now to reduce emissions and get us ready for the challenging decades ahead. We're also working with other local groups to build a broad coalition asking government to address the crisis with policies and programs that are urgently needed. We will also need your continued financial help and political support for the big asks we have for 2024. So how can you help? Today is Giving Tuesday. That's a day set aside by nonprofits all across North America as I guess a bit of an antidote to the buy more messages of Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Instead, Giving Tuesday is asking us to turn our focus to how we can support local nonprofits to build a better world. There are 3 ways you can help Transition achieve its ambitious plans for 2024. One is just simply to subscribe to our newsletter and thereby become a member. I know I've looked at the guest list before the webinar, and a lot of you are already members and get our newsletter, but for your neighbors and friends and family who live on the island, please encourage them. It's easy, it's we do it once a month, it's not spam, and we actually have a really high read rate. We can track these things. So folks, like over 70% open the newsletter to read it. It gives you the inside track on events and initiatives that we're doing, and we also make an effort to publicize events that partners on island are also doing. It's easy to sign up at transitionsaltspring.com. The second way you can help us is to become a supporter with a donation. Many of you out there watching tonight are already members or have donated maybe once or twice. We definitely encourage you, particularly this Giving Tuesday, to become a monthly donor. And thank you so much to our existing donors. You have made a measurable difference in what we've been able to do and extend our reach, quite frankly. Lastly, this is our appeal for 2024. You can get ready to help us as we basically make this pivot. This is the final step in our release of the Climate Action Report Card this fall that started with local elected officials, community groups, and now you, our community. We'll need your help to help us push local government to adopt our recommendations in 2024. We'll also be issuing a targeted call for experienced volunteers that can help build our volunteer team. We have an awesome advocacy circle, but we can always use more who are experienced at that kind of work. Lastly, like Mary said at the beginning, thanks, big thanks to Salt Spring Island Foundation and the CRD who supported the development of this wonderful climate action report card that you can download. Actually, I'll give you the links here. Now I will stop my presentation and get into the really fun part of the evening, which is the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Wow. I didn't think you could do it in your time frame, and you did. You did an excellent job. So well done, you.
Two rehearsals today.
That was a lot of information, and if you want more information, read the report card because there's a lot more there. But there are some really great questions in the chat, so I'm going to go directly to them. Some of them are asking for a little bit more information on both of your presentations, and so I think it'll kind of be a bouncing back and forth. But why don't we start with Elisa, who I have not met you, but from your questions, I would very much like to meet you. And I think this is firstly really a question for Tracy, and actually an excellent question. So what she's asking is, how do you see BC reducing emissions when its economy is based on growth, which increases energy and material throughout? And if you were David Eby, I mean, I'm sure this is what you struggle with all the time as somebody that wants to do something about it, but needs money and the economic strength.
So, and this is one of the really big challenges that we're facing, because we as a global society have decided to use, or to all agree to, this economic idea of never-ending growth, and it's not sustainable. And this is where scientists are calling for something that is called degrowth. And there's some really exciting things happening around this. There's a new economist that has started talking about using a system of donut economics. So right now, the big flaw that I see within both the federal and the provincial governments is that their success is measured using GDP or number of jobs. They're very limited in how we actually measure the success of government. And so that is tied, of course, to growth. Whereas what we really need to be asking is like, well, what I really want to know is, do we have enough teachers in our schools? And do we have enough nurses and doctors to support people when they're sick in our hospitals? Do we have enough hospital beds? And when it comes to climate action, of course, it's like, are we doing enough to reduce emissions? This is one of the key metrics that I think government needs to be evaluated on, not just growth, not just this false economic model, which is really only about 100 years old. I didn't realize we all bought into this idea of capitalism in the early 20th century. And we need to seriously ask ourselves, is it working for us? Because it isn't. It really isn't. It's leaving so many people behind. It's creating billionaires who aren't contributing to our society and the collective well-being of our society. Capitalism is broken. And so we really need to start talking about degrowth and start talking about climate action. And the exciting thing about what we're proposing, if you read our report, well, here it is. If you read our progress report, at the end of it is the original open letter that we wrote, and there's a vision for the future. And we offer this up because the climate emergency is an unprecedented opportunity to generate new, vibrant economic and social wealth as we transform where our energy comes from and how it is used. It's an opportunity. So, and there's other, it's very long. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But I see what we're doing as an opportunity. We have an opportunity right now to completely transform how our society works and to ensure that we are bringing everybody with us to make it a much more just and fair world that we live in. And that's an exciting thing. So that's a very long response to that question.
Maybe
I just want to add, Nanaimo, as Tracy and Mary both probably know, has adopted the donut economics as for Nanaimo, and they have already gone through the visioning stage of that. And I took a look at it, and it's been a little bit watered down by folks with a more traditional bent, but it's there, and it provides a really awesome starting point. And while you were talking, Tracy, I was thinking about, the little clothing swap that we did a while ago, and the toy swap we're about to have. It's like, what's Transition Salt Spring doing swaps for? It's about recoding our society away from that consumerist society to become one, more of a sharing economy and a circular economy. So thanks for the question and the point. It came from Elisa Rathje, who was a member of the steering committee for the Climate Action Plan.
I'm going to challenge you guys a bit more, because I'm going to pretend I'm that politician, having worked in government and probably more recently come to the environmental movement than many of the people here. And so I need to get reelected. You've already indicated we only have 7 years with increasing urgency of reducing greenhouse gases by 8% a year, and it may be more like 10% a year by the time we finally get our act together. You mentioned some things, though, that can be immediately shifted to investment in climate. So one of them that maybe you can expand on is highways. So we say we want to electrify our transportation, and yet we continue building highways as opposed to public transportation, which, in my mind, I don't know which highways we're talking about, but usually you can't get away with a highway for less than $1 billion. So are there opportunities to shift investment in the short term as we look for this lighter living degrowth scenario in the longer term?
Yes, so I'm not the expert on transportation. This progress report was essentially, it brought together 22 experts, and one of them is Eric Doherty, who lives in Victoria. He is the expert that has been bringing together a lot of the expertise on action number 8, which is to reduce emissions and shift to zero emission transportation. Based on what Eric says, yes, we do have that opportunity right now. We do, like, government has that choice about where they can allocate funding, and they can allocate it to highways and supporting highway expansion, or they can allocate it to supporting transit and active transportation. So it is a choice that has been made, and we're calling for a different choice, because the whole idea of if they build it, that it will come. I just look at Europe, I've seen that map. I'm sure lots of people have seen that map of the infrastructure, the public transit infrastructure that exists in Europe. And when you overlay that on North America, you want to weep. Because we simply don't have that same investment in infrastructure and public transit infrastructure. And that's because of our society being a very car-centric society. And it does create challenges, because our communities have grown based on that approach, right? So we do have some significant challenges to overcome to actually shift to a society where we have a lot of access to public transit and active infrastructure. But the thing that is exciting to me is that we are seeing that shift at the local government level. So for example, my family bought me an electric bike for my 40th birthday. It took me about 5 years to actually buy it. But last year I got an e-bike, and I love it, and I am riding everywhere. And because I have a really excellent trail between my neighborhood and downtown Squamish, it takes me about 7 minutes. I get there, actually, if you add in parking, it's quicker for me to ride my bike downtown. And I'm riding everywhere. I am very rarely using my car. And it's just so fun. E-bikes are so fun. And I bought a red e-bike, which is even more fun. So I don't know why, but it is so. Yeah, so I think it is a question of choice. And I do see a shift that's happening.
Has Tracy sold the minister?
Have I what, sorry? Yeah, did I sell the minister?
I wonder if, Tracy, if you managed to convince Minister Ackenhusen.
Minister Ackenhusen would like an e-bike, but her husband doesn't think it's safe here in Salt Spring. So I'm very interested in what GSS is doing on that. But speaking of transportation, there was another question in the chat around exactly that, in terms of, I think it was highlighted in one comment that 82%, and that sounds about right, of our trips on Salt Spring are done by cars. And then there was a question about public transit, and that's part of the TSS plan, because I think it quoted 2 or 3% of trips are made by transit. Not very many here on Salt Spring. Do you want to talk about that, Brian?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the transportation section in the report card is really good. And we've got the metrics all lined up there. And we do talk a lot about a non-vehicular transit. Yes, Mina Lee, we do, believe me. Mina Lee Johnson is a pedestrian and non-combustion engine and non-car advocate on the island, who's been really powerful in raising her voice at every meeting on this issue, and it's super important. Oh, getting some background noise from someone there. But yes, it is definitely, we need to do more. I noticed Gary Holman joined fairly recently. We need to do a lot more. We've got in the report card, I'll do what Tracy did. In the report card, there's a section that shows the number of minutes between each bus here. It's long. We are one of the best rural transit systems in the province in terms of ridership and the amount of money that supports it, which tells me that we could actually, the proportion of rider contribution to the box is really high here, which tells me that we might be able to shift that ratio a little bit and get more robust service. The other thing we need is to solve the last mile problem. We cannot have a modal shift. Like, I don't have a bus near my house. I'd have to walk or get a ride to a junction spot where there is a bus. We need to solve that problem. There's been some very exciting developments in rider apps that need to be exploited for island communities, and I think that's an area where we need to focus, as well as electrifying our fleet on the island of the buses we do have. We have, good buses, they're secondhand and whatnot, but we really need to electrify that fleet and just have more of them. But at the same time, we also have a certain amount of pressure we can apply as an NGO, and we are definitely going to be focusing in on that Salish Sea Trail, because I tell you, Tracy and Emiko, I don't know if you cycled on this island, but we have thousands of people come to this island a year with their cyclists thinking they're coming to cycling paradise. It's a meat grinder. It's not good. And I participate with my electric bike a couple times a year when we've got Adam Olsen coming and leading a parade downtown to raise awareness or have a meeting with a minister. And it scares the crap out of me, especially coming down Ganges Hill. But I know we have the hill's going to be repaved from the bottom of Ganges Hill up to Cranberry. And we're working right now to advocate for a lot more work to be done as a part of that contract coming in spring, hopefully.
Okay, so the minister would now like to turn the floor over to Emiko. Emiko, I'm sorry, I didn't catch you from before. And so whether you want to comment on transit or back on the original question in terms of how the practicality of moving this ship so we can invest in the right things. We need an economy, a good economy here in BC, as well as proper investment in climate change.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I'll be going backwards a little bit, kind of riffing off what Tracy said earlier. I think there's a very common fear held amongst not the climate eco warriors, but amongst other folks, that investing in climate or making changes to address climate change is going to result in loss. It's going to result in giving up the things that we love, in making sacrifices. And people feel afraid of being told you're going to have to change how you get around, what you eat. You're not going to be able to go on the vacations you love going on anymore. And I think that it's very important to be dispelling that myth. As Tracy mentioned, many of the systems that structure our world and society are broken already. Education is suffering, healthcare is suffering. How many of us love living in a capitalist society, right? Like, this is not the ideal world that we already have. And so I just wanted to just throw out there that I think it's very important to be trying to shift that narrative from you're going to have to give up things towards we can actually build futures that are stronger and healthier, and in which we are all generally happier. I don't know why we are so convinced to be clinging on to this present that we have, when so much of it is already not great, right? Our lives are, in some ways, just speaking generally, I would say pretty good here in the West. But there are a lot of aspects that can be so greatly improved that we just can't imagine right now because we don't have them. But we need to be, as climate advocates or activists or whatever we want to call ourselves, sharing that message that with climate action, we can actually create much better futures for ourselves and for future generations. It doesn't have to mean giving up everything that we love.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, Erin, if you can find it, there was a great opinion piece in the Vancouver Sun that I highlighted are cool things in our space, our Google space. It was around cool articles. But anyway, it speaks exactly of that in terms of it's we'll never win on climate change if it's seen as a sacrifice. It's got to be seen as a change in mindset and a way of being. One of the things that I really liked about the BC Climate Emergency report that I hadn't seen elsewhere that speaks a bit to that, and that is it's under action number 5, leave no one behind. And you talk explicitly about industries that might be impacted and how we need to help out the workers and make sure that they're not left behind. So here we are saving the planet, but they've lost their jobs and their livelihood. And I don't see that mentioned often. And I think, particularly as I'm a politician here, as premier, I need to worry about those things so I can get my votes. But I thought it was a very insightful piece of your report. Another key question that I hear asked often on Salt Spring, or maybe it's me that's asking it. And so this one's for you, Brian, in terms of our plans around better forest management, and the question around what we're doing or what can be done to prevent tree cutting on private properties and just general better management of private properties. Because we know 80% or 75% of forest lands on the island are in private hands. Can you speak a bit to our thinking on that?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. As we all know, we just came out of a period in the last, before the Trustee Harris and Trustee Patrick were elected last round. We came out of what in Salt Spring terms is a kind of bloody period where there was a lot of talk about tree cutting bylaws, and it was a very divisive period. And I think that it is definitely, regulating tree cutting is a recommendation in the Climate Action Plan. Would I put that out there first as a policy and introduce that as a plate on the table? No, I would not. I think that we need to do a whole bunch of things as well to change the ratio between the honey and the vinegar. I think there needs to be a whole lot more education with willing private landowners to make them aware and incentivize them. Money talks. I mean, one of the things that happens is when land is being flipped or sold, a way to get cash quick is to give a so-called blank slate to the new owners. And the new owners might bemoan the lack of trees, but they bought the property and they're going to see the trees grow again. We need to intervene at that transaction point with incentives that make it so that it's not fiscally favorable. Money talks again, and education and fiscal supports. This might be beyond our little island and the Islands Trust to be able to do that. There were moves to try and get quasi-municipal powers. I mean, Saanich, right across the water, can do this. Why can't we? I think when, one of the, on the way to town, there's a big piece of land that was basically clear cut when there was talk of that kind of bylaw coming in. And it was barely even talk, but it got people heading for their revolvers, and it never happened. It wasn't the intention to do that. I think we need to be demonstrating the alternatives. There's one man, whose name I won't mention because he has a sawmill, but he's he's a really great guy, and he was maybe knows some of these folks who were reaching for their revolvers when there was some talk about tree cutting regulation. His land is some of the best stewarded land on this island, and he understands better than most what it looks like to have a really well stewarded forest and what the benefits are of that forest. We need the price of carbon to go up more so that we can monetize the value of those trees standing rather than those trees dead. It's already becoming not cost effective to cut second growth cedar, for example. I think according to folks I've talked to, it's almost not profitable. But cedar, the old growth cedar, is still profitable, which is why we're seeing continued cutting in the old growth forest. Here on Salt Spring, we don't have that. We've got second growth trees, but a lot of those logs get shipped off raw to mills over on the mainland. What if there was stamping of that lumber on island so that we could actually use it here on island? Right now, I mean, I've got an unpermitted structure, a greenhouse on my property that has unstamped Douglas fir lumber that's harder than any spruce pine fir that I can get from Windsor plywood. It's going to stand for years and years. And if we could actually change some of those regulations and ensure that stamped lumber on this island could be used, we could blunt the edge of that clear-cut argument, along with a higher price for carbon, utilize that higher price for carbon to actually incentivize people to do the right thing.
Okay, Brian, thank you very much. We are edging up towards 8 o'clock, so we're going to start closing because I want to get you out of here at 8 as promised. But before we go, and I'll give Brian and the opportunity to do the final closure, but we wanted to just ask you a couple more questions before you go, if you'll indulge us in a couple more polls, because we learned so much from that. And so, Erin Ann, if you can put up the last poll. And so this really goes to what Tracy was talking about, is our vote counts. So tell me give us the your thoughts in terms of how much will your voting decision in the next election be shaped by climate agendas? So negligible, it won't affect your vote. Second options, considerably, I'll take climate agendas into account when making my decision. Prominently, climate issues will play a major role. Or decisively, my vote will be primarily driven by the candidate's stance on climate agendas. 100%, I love it. Thank you so much. Not that there's any right answer on here, but I just happen to like that. Okay, prominently, that's pretty darn good too. There are other things going on in our lives, for sure. Thanks, that's fantastic.
And we have a weird situation on this island too, where we have an incumbent who happens to be pretty popular too. So that gets factored in as well to people's strategic thinking, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Wow, that's great.
Shall we go to the next question, which is basically just kind of what is your commitment following this webinar, though I think it's pretty strong given that we've got such strong views in terms of protecting our planet coming through on the chat and the discussion here.
We have a committed audience. I can see that already.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah. Do you want to
go to the next question quickly?
Yeah.
Erin Ann?
Just the two.
I think it's I'm not sure. Maybe we don't have the second one. Maybe we'll just turn to you.
There are 2 questions there. They've been answered.
Oh, they are. I'm sorry. I'm the one. I'm not scrolling. Okay. Thank you guys for being smarter than I am and answering the second question around your climate action commitments. Fantastic. And I really love how both Tracy and Brian gave you clear direction on what they'd like to see in terms of your support for their organizational agendas. And with that, to keep us on time, I'm going to turn it over to Brian to close and just give you my personal thank you for what a great audience you have been and so supportive of both our organizations that have presented today. Thank you very much and have a great rest of the evening. Over to you, Brian.
Yeah, thank you. It's Mary. Mary, this is her first gig and being the host. I love it. Thank you for doing this, Mary. Mary's a new member to our advocacy circle, and she has been a powerhouse. In fact, it's the back of her head you see in the release of the of your folks' climate action report card a month ago, 6 weeks ago. So she was at the launch, a real keener. So thank you, Mary. And it's for people like Mary that we're really looking for some additional volunteer help in our circle and in other circles at Transition to do some of the heavy lifting. We've got an awesome part-time paid staff, and thanks to support from a lot of foundations, some from government, and definitely a growing proportion from islanders, we're able to pay islanders to do work on this critical work on this island. So thank you for that, and keep it up. We're really going to need you. I in closing, just want to thank Erin Ann Harper, the longest standing and sometimes sitting employee at Transition Salt Spring, who is behind the magic of making this all work, of spotlighting us, of getting the polls up. And we also have Inga Michelson, who's our education lead, who has very deftly herded us kitty cats in the past few weeks, which was no small task, and making sure that tonight was very smooth. Also behind the scene, of course, we've got Darlene Gage, our executive director, who is super busy with Giving Tuesday, getting the lead out, so to speak, and doing happy dances every time a really great donation comes in. It's been fun to see that. And of course, the other members of our advocacy circle who are behind the work that we presented to you tonight, including Rebecca Berman, and oh my God, I'm going to forget somebody as I'm blanking out here.
Kelda
Logan, our board member, ex-principal at GISS, has been in both of those folks have been an amazing addition. And of course, Darlene and Mary as well are part of that circle.
Natasha.
And Natasha Pratt and Inga Michelson. So, so thank you so much for your time and attention. We've got an audience of highly climate savvy folks out there. So we appreciate your commitment to spread the joy. We look forward to breaking bread with you over the coming year as we dive deep on what we can do together. I also want to hats off to some of our elected leaders who are with us tonight. I know Gary Holman was with us for he's still there on his iPad. We have Earl Rook as well, LCC Commissioner. I know John Wakefield, who is the Emergency Program Coordinator. Thank you so much for being with us. And we also had Trustee Patrick with us tonight as well. So thank you. It really means a lot to you're kind of our audience in part here tonight for these messages. So thank you for your work. And thank you to all of you for coming tonight. We wish you well. We wish you a safe holiday season, a virus-free holiday season with lots of wonderful food, company, and love. So stay tuned for our toy swap coming up. You can find out more about that on our website. And don't forget that webinar being hosted and featuring Dr. Ruth Waldeck on the work we're doing up on the mountain. And of course, some awesome videos featuring the work that's going on there with people from 80 all the way down to 8 and actually even younger. So it's pretty inspiring. Thank you and good night.
Thank you all. Thank you.